So welcome everyone to the June Patch Tuesday webinar. We are halfway through the year, update Tuesday wise. It's surprising, but yes, it's already here. We're at June. So we have a lot of things to go through today. There's a little bit of news that we're going to cover, and we're going to go through some recent 0 days that you want to be aware of. Then we're going to get into covering the Microsoft and Google Chrome update that came out yesterday. Todd's going to walk us through that. And I'm going to wrap us up with the Between the Patch Tuesdays, which is going to go through and talk about everything that released since last month and now, although we're going to cover a little bit of that, as we get into some of the news as well, because some of that is relevant there. With that, yesterday's update, the main things that we're tracking and we're going to talk about here today. We had 12 bulletins, 9 of which were critical, 3 important from Microsoft. They had their normal kind of 10 that include like the OS, Office, and things like that. They also had .NET and an Exchange update. So we're going to talk about a few of those things as well. And then Google Chrome did release a new version of Google Chrome yesterday, resolved 5 vulnerabilities, one of which was critical. This one is actually, we had our first question just before this. Tony asked a question about versions between the Chrome 109 build and Chrome 114. So Windows 10 and later, you'll notice that the builds are all 1.14 or 114. Whatever they're at right now. There's a couple of releases that have already happened this month. June 6th, we're going to talk about. They did have a release and it responded to a 0 day. And then the one yesterday resolves 5 more vulnerabilities. So if you haven't done a Chrome update yet this month, more important than yesterday's release is that 0 day that was resolved on the 6th. We're going to talk about that and what it's doing in just a moment. But that's what we'll want to focus on there. There were some other more minor kind of updates. Adobe did have 4 software updates. This is for things like their commerce and animate and more of the less common applications. They've prioritized those as a priority 3. And their definition of priority 3 is these are applications that are less likely to be targeted by threat actors. They're literally like a handful in an organization at most instances of that. So they're not widely targeted because there's so few of them. And if you compromise that application, there's not much behind it. Not like, an environment has only typically one Exchange server if it has Exchange running, but Exchange is the heart of all, email coming in and out of a company. So there's a wealth of real data in there. Where like an application like Adobe Reader is everywhere. From there, I can step into literally any part of the environment. So they put that as a priority 3 for those applications that are less likely to be targeted and basically put it to your discretion. 3 out of 4 of those did have critical CVEs they responded to. But again, because they're less targeted. Tony, you're commenting on MS Edge. That's Edge Chromium. So when Chrome updates, Edge updates. So that's where I was commenting on Chrome there. Sorry, I didn't clarify that specifically. But we're going to talk about a few more releases there in just a moment. I'm going to be going into some screen sharing here as well. So for those of you new to the On24 platform that we're in here, right now you've got kind of the primary, slide deck within your window there. You've got some other things in there. There's some assets you can download. You can actually get today's PowerPoint. So as I share my screen and start going through links, you will have access to grab the PDF and get access to all of those links so that if you need to go dive into and do some additional research there, you've got those available to you right now and you don't have to wait for our follow-up email. Another thing about the On24 platform, as I switch over into screen sharing mode, we're going to spend more time talking there. You can resize your windows there so you can make the slide share a little bit smaller while we look at the links that I'm going through in the browser. So without further ado, we're going to jump in and take a look at some of the news that came out. The first one, especially for those of you on the white hat side, if you're doing any type of security research, be aware that there is a bit of there's some shenanigans going on. We've got threat actors who are putting fake POC exploits on GitHub for Windows and Linux. And those are actually distributing malware for the threat actor. So basically, they're trying to get into researchers and I'm guessing try to, get ahead of the white hats and, understand what they're looking at and possibly even, do things to those white hats. So be aware that that's going on. The article here talks about some of the details of that. They're masquerading in this case as a group called High Sierra Cybersecurity. So you might even want to take a look at your Twitter or your LinkedIn and see if you're interacting with anybody from this High Sierra Cybersecurity. You can see here from Greg's post, he's looking at a number of fake personas that have been created under this High Sierra Cybersecurity. These may have LinkedIn accounts, they may have Twitter accounts, they may have some history set up behind this. And those are the people who are the contributors of these malware loaded POCs on GitHub. So be aware of that. And I think this is going to be a new tactic that we're probably going to see more of. So approach with caution. Make sure that if you are going out and looking at POCs and other contributions on GitHub, just like any developer should be doing, you want to make sure that the projects out there that you're looking at have well-known or established kind of contributors and activity going on. If they don't, you possibly want to question or do some additional validation before you might proceed. And even with that, this group that's masquerading as this High Sierra Cybersecurity, they have done a good job of trying to make it look like there's a lot more depth to this organization than that it's real. So that was our first bit of news here today. More of a fair warning of things going on and what you might want to be aware of there. The second that I wanted to talk about, and this one is definitely making a bit of news. There is Chinese cyber spies have been detected using a VMware ESXi 0-day that released earlier, and that is CVE 2023-20867. This is definitely a nasty one. If they use this in your environment, they're able to authenticate between host and guest and not generate any authentication log events or show up in any way that is easily traceable. So they could get in and start to exploit this and take advantage of this with a very minimal ability for you to detect what's going on. So I've provided a couple of links that talk about the initial details came out in September about this malicious vSphere installation bundle and trying to attach packages to that. The CVE that's being tracked there, you can see that here. The VMware Tools version that resolves the vulnerability, that's really what you want to understand is, have you plugged that VMware Tools version up to at least 12.2.5? So that's a few of the details that you want to take a look at. But this is definitely one for anybody running VMware. Make sure that you've got that. I included the additional Mandiant link. So the researchers that were quoted in that article, they've provided details in their article as well. More for making sure that you've got the ESXi VMware Tools updated and that you are aware that vulnerability is available. So if you haven't gotten up to that version, something else you may want to prioritize. The next vulnerability was the Google Chrome 0-day that I mentioned. This is going back in time a little bit here. So this released on June 6th, the update to plug that vulnerability. So this was about a week ago that was resolved. The CVE in this case was 2023-3079. It was a high severity discovered by Google. And it was a type confusion in V8, Chrome's JavaScript engine, and could allow the attacker to, the engine was misinterpreting the type of an object during runtime, potentially leading to malicious memory manipulation and arbitrary code execution. So type confusion vulnerability allowing them to execute arbitrary code. And it was being used in attacks in the wild. So definitely one that you want to make sure, if you did not do the June 6th update, you can go ahead and do the update that just released yesterday. And for those of you running on Edge, Edge is Chromium based. So look for the latest Edge release as well, or the Edge release that released at least last week, resolving that. So that 0 day is in both Chrome and Edge because of the Edge browser using Chromium. So let's see. The next in the lineup of news is around Apple. Apple had some updates towards the end of May. This came out May 21st. So we talked about the Apple Rapid Security Response last month. So we have our next round of Apple using this new system to push updates out more rapidly. There were 3 0-day exploits. The list is here. I'll zoom in one more step here because on this article, it looks a little bit smaller than the last couple. But Apple was urging iPhone and iPad users to update to iOS 16.5 and iPadOS 16.5 immediately to plug these 3 0 days. The first is a remote attacker may be able to break out of the web content security sandbox. Another one, the second one, processing web content may disclose sensitive information. And the third one is processing maliciously crafted web content may lead to arbitrary code execution. So 3 vulnerabilities. Let's see, I think down here they talk about it. Now, maybe they don't actually come right out and say it, but usually when Apple is going to trigger this rapid security response, it's because somebody is actually taking advantage of this. I don't think they actually come out and say it anywhere in the article, but assume that these are actively being exploited, and that's how they came across them. So that's why they're urging the rapid response there. Looks like these 3 don't affect the Mac OS. Oh, wait, Mac workstation. So they did have it here. Or maybe they're just talking about devices impacted by identified exploits include. Okay, so at least one of them could be affecting the Mac OS. The hard part about Apple is a lot of times they're obscure about the details. So I apologize for that. iOS and iPadOS definitely affected by these. It's unclear if the writer just crossed over into more of statistics here. It doesn't look like the rapid security response release affected the Mac OS. It looked like it was just iPhone and iPad.
That's what I thought too, Chris, when I was reading through this.
Yep. So that's what the best we can see here. These 3 did not affect the Mac OS systems, just iPad and iOS. So, all right. So that is the additional news leading up to Patch Tuesday. The next thing I wanted to talk about is in the lineup of 85 CVEs that were in this month's release, only 78 of those were net new. 7 of them were updated or, most of them informational, but there's a couple that have some more important stuff we're going to talk about. The only 2 that had anything relating to a confirmed exploit or a public disclosure were re-releases. They were both released prior to this month for the first time, and both of them just had some informational only updates on there. So most of you, this is not going to be a concern. Just be aware that the 2 that were in the list were information only updates as long as you've been up to date on your latest. The first one, of course, is a bit of a blast from the past. If you all remember your CVEs, this is Print Nightmare, Windows Print Spooler Remote Code Execution. The first one that really started the Print Nightmare, fun that we had last year. Actually in 2021. God, it's been that long. So CVE 2021-34527 received an update, and that update specifically just added, if you go down to the notes at the very end, I'm going to scroll way down, in the security update table, they added all supported editions of Windows 10 version 21H2, 1121H2, and 1122H2, and Windows Server 2022. Microsoft is just making sure it's explicitly clear that, yes, the print spooler vulnerability did affect even the newer versions of Windows that came out. Now, I drilled into and looked at the downloads for many of those. It looks like as long as you've got November 2022 or later as the latest branch update you've done on these systems, that you should be covered. So the 22H2 version that came out and Windows 2022, the November release on those looked like it covered this, and the 21H2 and versions would have had an earlier version as the latest there. So again, unless you've got some specific systems that haven't gotten to at least the November 2022 OS update, you should be covered here from the OS update perspective. With that, there were some additional, steps that you could take from a, point and print perspective and do that type of configuration. Again, if you've done those types of additional restrictions to installation of new print drivers and things across all of your systems, then you should be covered there as well. If you have not done those for some of the newer branches that came out, then you may want to take a look at that and make sure you're covered there. For the most part, for most of you, this should be information only change, and no real action should be needed other than to just do a sanity check and make sure that you've done your diligence around that. The second one is a vulnerability that just came out in March this year. This was the slide there, the Windows Smart Screen Security Feature Bypass vulnerability. So we talked about this one earlier this year. When it came out, it had a fairly low CVSS score, although it was being actively exploited in the wild. So we basically said our guidance around that is the CVSS score and vendor severity of moderate are less of what you should be triggering off of. You should be focused on the fact that it's actively been exploited in the wild, and that should have been what's driving your priority around that. Microsoft's change in this case, again, information only, the CVSS values were changed. For most of you, again, as long as you're at the March or later OS updates across your environment, you should be covered against this one. So no new exploited or publicly disclosed vulnerabilities this month. Just wanted to make sure that was clear, because when the list comes out and there's confirmed exploits, people want to know specifically what those are. In this case, both of those were included because Microsoft made information only level changes to those two CVEs. All right. So now getting into the CVEs that are really going to matter for you this month. The first one is CVE 2022-27967. So this is coming up again because we've now hit the next phase of, Microsoft is basically doing changes to both Kerberos and Netlogon. We've talked about this a couple previous months because they basically started these changes late last year, and there's been phases that have been incrementing as they go forward, moving towards full enforcement of these. And really what you need to be concerned about is, have you done an adequate level of testing to make sure that you're not going to have some breaking changes as Microsoft continues to roll forward towards full enforcement. So this month, I wanted to make sure that you guys have all the detail possible. If you scroll down in here, you're going to get down to the where can you find more information about these changes. There is this how to manage Kerberos and Netlogon protocol changes link. We're going to go over to that right now. So this KB 5020805, how to manage Kerberos protocol changes related to CVE 2022-37967. So if you scroll down, they talk about the different actions you should be taking, making sure that you've got the November 8th, 2022 update. That's where they put the enforcement in place. Then you get to the whole move your domain controllers into audit mode. There's registry key settings that you would have set up as part of the aftermath of that 2022 release. And then you wanted to start monitoring that. And then enforcement, you could enable it at any time once you were ready. If you had not enforced it yet, that's where these next steps are coming into play. So if you scroll down a little bit more, the timing of the updates to address this, November 8th was the initial deployment. They added this pack signature capability to Kerberos and added measures to address the security bypass vulnerability in the Kerberos protocol. So that was the initial release. In December, that was the second phase, they switched all devices to audit mode by default. So authentication would still be allowed, but basically they were raising an event so that you would know, where in your environment did you have Kerberos authentication tickets that were coming across without that PAC signature, or with that PAC signature but not properly set up. So that was the second phase. We're now into the June phase, the third deployment phase. Here, Microsoft is removing the ability to disable the PAC signature addition. So that value of 0 on the registry key is no longer available. So this forces all machines into audit mode. You're going to get these audit events regardless of whether you had that configured to do so or not before. If you had it configured at 0 and you were disabling the audit, then that's kind of what's going on here, is now you're all in audit mode. Next month, the initial enforcement phase is going to go into motion. So this month, you should be checking to make sure, do you have any of those audit events still coming up? Then I'll scroll down in a minute and show you what that audit ID looks like. But next month, they're going to remove the ability to set that value of 1 for the full PAC signature subkey. That's going to move the default for this value to a 3, which is actually going into enforcement mode. Now, it can be overridden by an administrator with an explicit audit setting, but they're forcing it into audit mode by default, or into enforcement mode by default. Later this year, in October, Microsoft is going to move the audit mode support altogether, and anything that's any service ticket without a new PAC signature will be denied authentication at that point. So for those of you using Kerberos, if you haven't already, make sure that this month you're paying attention to and ensuring that those audit records are being evaluated to see if you have any that are not properly set up. And if they're not, you got to try to get that resolved. Otherwise, in July, you may have to go in and tweak that registry setting after updating to go back into non-enforcement mode until later. But October, you've got to get this sorted. Otherwise, you won't be able to update past that point, or you'll break Kerberos authentication in your environment. If you scroll down a little bit further, that's about the registry setting. It's got the new signatures added but not verified, audit mode. So basically, this month, they're only allowing audit mode or enforcement mode, but the default will be enforcement mode. And if we, where did they, here it is. What you're looking for in your events, in the event viewer, is if you find an error with event ID 42. Take a look at this, there, but basically the full PAC signature failed, or the PAC signature missing. Those are the events that you're looking for. If you get that event ID 43 or 44, that's telling you a little bit about what needs to be corrected yet. All right, so that is the big change on the Kerberos side. Before I move on, I am going to check and see, did we have any specific questions from anybody on this? And it doesn't look like we did.
No, I didn't see any, Chris.
Okay. Perfect. All right. So next, we're going to go over to CVE 2022-38023. This is the Netlogon RPC elevation of privilege vulnerability. Similarly, Microsoft had to set into motion a phased approach to transitioning how they're going to be handling Netlogon, the Netlogon protocol changes. So they have a link that's going to take you into more information. Again, I've provided that in the slide as well. So for those of you who need to get into this information, grab that PDF download from our additional content today. And in there on this slide, you'll have the CVE and then the KB link as well. Jumping into that KB article. So this came up back in April. Microsoft had moved to enforcement by default So we're kind of going on to the next stage here as well. So the third phase here, but if we just kind of walk through this, in November last year was the initial deployment. Microsoft released the update to resolve the CVE 2022-38023 by enforcing RPC sealing on all Windows clients. That RPC seal is kind of that additional step that they've added to plug this gap. In April, we talked about this then, but just as a refresher, we talked about the fact that they were going into initial enforcement mode. What would happen there is Windows updates released on or after April 11th removed the ability to disable RPC sealing by setting a value of 0 for that require seal or registry key. So that was the initial enforcement phase. Now they're going into enforcement by default. So the require seal registry subkey will be moved to enforced mode unless administrators explicitly configured to be under compatibility mode. You still have access to compatibility mode, but it's going by default to enforcement mode if you haven't set that. Vulnerable connections from all clients, including third parties, will be denied authentication if you're in full enforcement mode. Compatibility mode, compatibility mode made it so that it would enforce for domain controllers or for accounts, any account that's a trust account. So if you've got a trusted account or a domain controller, that was already happening as of April. Now they're putting it into full enforcement mode unless you go back and configure compatibility mode to run. Next month, compatibility mode goes away. Enforcement will be by default. Going forward, the RPC sealing will be required. So again, this is kind of the double check. If you have things that are not ready yet, make sure you go into compatibility mode. That's that registry setting just down below here. It talks to you about that. Compatibility mode is a value of 1. You can no longer disable it after this month, but you can still run in compatibility mode. Next month, they're removing the ability to do compatibility mode, and it will require RPC seal on all Netlogon requests. All right. So that is the two big changes this month. Again, more of, yes, it's security related, but a lot more of your focus this month is going to be around making sure you're operationally ready, because Microsoft is transitioning to require these things, and you will have no choice very shortly here. John was saying he sees signer seal, not require seal. So I'm going based off of what I read in the article here. Require seal registry key is if you were basically doing the bypass. If you didn't explicitly put there, signer seal might be what the registry key is called otherwise. So I don't know specifically why you're seeing that. But if you wanted to, if you were disabling it before, or if you're trying to run in compatibility mode, the specific registry key here is require seal to do that. So that might just be a matter of, by default configuration, if you didn't put this require seal value in place to either disable or go into compatibility mode, that might be why you're seeing that. Luke's question, these CVEs look alike. They are quite similar in many ways, but Netlogon and Kerberos both had some security flaws. Microsoft is doing these in 2 parallel tracks. There's a lot of similarity to how these are being implemented, but they are 2 different things. So if you're using Kerberos, that applies to you. If you're using Netlogon, the other applies to you. If you're using both apply to you. So definitely make sure to look at both CVEs and their related KB pages, because both of these protocols are undergoing changes. Okay, so Jared was saying he can confirm the signer seal shows up in registry. The updated key does not exist from the Microsoft article. Okay, yeah, I don't know what to tell you guys on that. I'm going based off of specifically what the registry key is saying. So if you're not seeing the require seal and you're seeing that signer seal instead, my assumption is that signer seal may show up there as well, but the require seal is how you would implement the compatibility mode, is my understanding. So Next question I would throw out there would be more to Microsoft to clarify and say, documentation is saying this, but I'm seeing this. And they would have to answer that one. Unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for you guys on that. So David's question, are those registry keys added at the time of install, or do we need to inject them separately? A lot of times when Microsoft introduces this, they may have some registry values by default. Usually when you're doing some type of override, they require you to add that additional key. So in this case, if you were doing the disable or compatibility mode, you would have to go add this additional subkey value, typically is how they do it. But I've seen over the years variations where it's there by default or it's not. So that I would assume that in this case, it's not there by default. And if you wanted to either disable or go into compatibility mode, you would have had to put it there. That would be my initial assumption, but I don't have a fresh install that I've looked into this specifically on to go and confirm whether it shows up by default. Okay, so going down to the event logins. Netlogon service encountered a client using RPC signing instead of RPC sealing. So gentlemen, this might be where your question may get more detail. The signer might be because of that difference. RPC using signing instead of sealing. So that might be why you're seeing signer instead of seal. You must take the following actions to resolve the system error. So they've got details down there about domain member digital encryption or signed secure channel data is set to enable. So if you're seeing that signer versus the require seal, that's the difference. Is apparently it's RPC has signing or sealing as two different modes. Let's see. All domain join machines are affected by the CVE. Events will show who is most impacted by this after the November 2022 release. Okay. What is RPC signing and RPC sealing? Okay, so RPC sealing is when Netlogon is both signing and encrypts the message to send over the wire. So that's the new variation there. So sealing is what's replacing signing only. That appears to be the difference there. So you guys aren't seeing the registry key because you haven't put that require seal registry key in place. It won't be there by default by the appearance. If you need to run in compatibility mode for some reason, that's when you would add this key. Otherwise, by default, you're going to be transitioning over to enforcement mode as of next month. So each step of the way, if you don't have the registry key there, it will default to what Microsoft is doing in that phase. So in June, basically, it's going to be enforcing unless you've explicitly set that registry key to a value of 1 for compatibility mode. All right. I think that's the best we've got for information for you on those. All right. I think we got all the questions, additional questions there. And that wraps up the additional news for this month that we wanted to make sure to bring to your attention. So switching back to the presentation now, you'll see my screen share just went away. And this month, there was a boatload of development tool updates. So for those of you who do know that you've got a lot of development going on in your organization, and especially for Azure DevOps and Visual Studio shops, make sure that your teams are aware that there were updates to .NET, to Azure DevOps, to those who are pulling in a lot more from GitHub, NuGet, and Autodesk through the Visual Studio integration. Multiple CVEs were resolved in each of those areas: the Sys internal suite, Visual Studio itself, YARP 2.0. So a whole lot of updates to the development stack have gone into this month's update. That accounted for quite a number of CVEs. I think there were 3 on Autodesk, 5 on GitHub, 1 for NuGet, maybe a couple for NuGet, multiple .NET, 2 to 3 Azure DevOps vulnerabilities that were resolved. And each of these will be a matter of either the development team has to consume the latest of those projects to resolve the vulnerabilities, or in the case of like Azure DevOps, you've got to update your Azure DevOps server to the latest version, and Visual Studio, update your Visual Studio instance to the latest version. So the development team, for the most part, has to do the steps to resolve all of these. Most of you won't be able to resolve those vulnerabilities. It will be the engineering or development team that has to do that. End of life for 2012, rapidly approaching October 10th or October 9th, extended end date, October 10th, 2023. That's the last Patch Tuesday that Server 2012 will be covered. After that, you either need to make sure you got those out of your environment, or you need to make sure that you're getting on the ESU coverage for 1 to 3 years. Microsoft is going to be doing the same thing they did with 2008 and Windows 7. So 1, 2, or 3 years worth of coverage there, depending on how long you're planning to keep 2012 around. But we are also planning on supporting that as well within the Ivanti products. So if you did the 2008 or Windows 7 ESU support, same approach there. Come October, you'll need to make sure that's in place. And lifecycle awareness. We have one Windows 10 Home and Pro branch that is end of support after the June update. So those of you running Windows 10 Home and Pro Edition 21H2, the final Patch Tuesday release was yesterday. So make sure that any branches on that platform that are still out in your environment get moved over to the 22H2 version. Otherwise, it looks like Windows 11 Home and Pro is the next one we need to worry about, and that's not for a few more months. So that's our lifecycle awareness there. Todd, anything else to add on that?
No, I said it's hard to believe Windows 11, the first one, is already coming to an end.
Yeah, it's crazy. And that wraps up the news and additional updates there. Todd, go ahead and take it away for the bulletin up and release update.
All right. Thanks, Chris. Let's walk through what happened yesterday. I think Chris already covered this one in quite a bit of depth. We had an update for Chrome Desktop. Stable Channel version 114 came out, addressed 5 different vulnerabilities, all of them related to remote code execution. There was a lot of chat earlier. You might have seen that version 109 was released as well today. And there was some confusion around that. Why is 109 out? Well, that's actually supporting Server 2021. 2012, sorry. They're still, Microsoft is using that line to continue to support Chrome on top of the older servers. So be aware of that one. It's actually just superseding others in the 109 line, not the 114 line. So kind of just be aware of that. We're not going backwards in time. As far as Windows 11 goes, we did have 32 vulnerabilities addressed this month. Obviously, updates for both the 21H2 and the 22H2 versions. Wide range of types of impact addressed this particular month. Rated critical because of the various vulnerabilities that were addressed. Still carrying forward some known issues in these versions. In 22H2, we still have this issue around provisioning. It's been around for a while. Microsoft keeps saying they're working on it, but we'll see what happens there. And then the other one is on the original 21H2 version. There are some issues with third-party UI customization apps running after you do the update. Particularly, they call out Explorer Patcher and Start All Back, so be aware of those. There may be some other ones in there as well. Basically, they tell you to uninstall and reinstall. With this coming to end of life in a couple of months, we may not even see a fix for this. It's kind of just more an annoying thing than anything else. Windows 10, we saw the updates as well. 36 vulnerabilities this month across all of the various versions that are supported today. They're listed on the top here. Again, covered by 5 different KB articles. Nothing new as far as known issues in these. We've seen this cluster update issue for quite a while in the older version of 2019, the 2019 release. And basically, it has to do with a delay in the cluster services starting up. You can go in and manually update them, but they will eventually come up. They typically tell you after about 20 minutes, they will come up and start running. We've also been carrying forward this kiosk login issue for quite a while from January, it looks like. So this one has not yet been resolved either. But the good thing is nothing new introduced as far as we know. So these are still out there. And we've seen this issue on ESXi failing on Server 2022 for a while. They say they're working with VMware on this one. Haven't seen an update on it yet, but hopefully we get this one resolved soon. This is on the latest version of Server 2022. We did get our regular updates for Server 2012 this month. Again, as Chris mentioned, coming to end of life in October. They are doing, of course, the regular previews as well as the regular updates. The preview went out on May 9th. 20 vulnerabilities addressed this month in the monthly rollup. Again, the monthly rollup is the cumulative update that includes a lot of CVEs from the past, going back to basically October of 2016, a long time ago. Security only update as well. Again, fixing just these 20 vulnerabilities. Very tactical. The security only update is designed to be less intrusive, but the downside is that you're not getting all the older vulnerabilities addressed. So if you're using security only updates, you need to make sure that you apply the security only updates every month, or maybe periodically roll up the monthly roll up to make sure you're getting the latest performance updates as well as security updates on your servers. We did get the monthly roll up for Server 2012 R2 as well. Again, different kernel from Server 2012. We did see 23 vulnerabilities addressed in Server 2012 R2 this month. Again, a note that Windows 8.1, which also has the same operating system kernel as Server 2012 R2, was put on end of support back in January of this year. Not a very popular, end user operating system. Microsoft decided not to support it moving forward. So it has reached end of life as far as January goes. We also saw the security only update. Again, the same 23 vulnerabilities that were addressed in the monthly rollup. Again, in a very tactical update with just those 23 vulnerabilities, not anything from the past. We did see an update for SharePoint Server. They did address 5 vulnerabilities, again, rated critical. No known issues reported with this, and notice that they have dropped support for 2013. We didn't see any updates for that this month. They did report that they were going to drop support back in April, I believe. And so now we see the subscription server. We see version 2016 and 2019. So if you're running on the older 2013 version, time to update. We did see the monthly rollup for .NET this month, the framework version. They were updates all the way from 2.0 through 4.8.1. Usually we see 1 or 2 vulnerabilities, and usually they're important. But this month we saw 6 vulnerabilities addressed. They were rated critical. Some of them were rated critical. Interesting to note that 3 of these were around remote code execution, 1 around elevation of privilege, and 2 denial of service vulnerabilities. What's interesting is they did report a known issue. It's actually related to that denial of service vulnerability. There are some additional checks that the .NET framework does now around X.509 certificates. Basically, the denial of service was an issue around if they were extremely large certificates. They could impact and bog down the system, especially if they were just a bunch of gibberish that were pushed down to you. Basically, what's happening now is the .NET framework is checking prior to implementing and reading in the .509 certificates on the information that's stored there. And it's kind of related to solving that denial of service issue. But there is a known issue where it may take a while to update. So kind of be aware of that one. I did not go through. There are multiple KB articles depending on which version of .NET framework you're running. Didn't list them all out here, but you might want to go in and take a look at those individually. I think there's 2 or 3 different versions of the KB articles for each one of the .NET frameworks that are out there. So just kind of be aware of that one. Again, fixing 6 vulnerabilities is rated critical. So important that you roll out these .NET framework updates this month. Like the other operating systems I talked about, there is a monthly rollup for .NET, as well as there is a security-only update for the .NET updates as well. Again, addressing just these 6 vulnerabilities if you just want to update for these particular ones. On the important side, getting away from the critical updates, we did see Office updates this month. 5 different vulnerabilities abilities addressed. None of these were publicly disclosed or known exploited. I did list out the particular vulnerabilities here in case you want to go in and take a look at them. And if you're looking for the actual update information, you can go in and click on the link that I have on the slide here to get more detail on that. Again, these are the click-to-run versions, Microsoft 365 apps, the Office 2019 version, and the Office Long-Term Service Channel version 2021. As far as regular Office goes, another set of important updates as well. 5 vulnerabilities here as well. Remote code execution, and there's One difference in the last vulnerability there, 33.140, has to do with spoofing. That's why you didn't see spoofing on the previous slide for the click-to-run versions. It was a different vulnerability that was addressed. Again, 5 different KB articles addressing whether it be Excel, Office for Mac, or release notes, or Outlook 20 Office. There's another typo. It should be 2013, not 2103. So be aware of those as well. 5 different vulnerabilities addressed this month. Again, only rated important for Microsoft Office. Finally, we did see an update for Exchange Server. 2 different vulnerabilities addressed. Again, supporting 2016 CU23, the cumulative update 23, and 2019, the latest 2 versions, cumulative update 11 and cumulative update 12. Again, 2 vulnerabilities rated important this month around remote code execution. I'm going to put this in the stack as well for update this month. And so that's kind of it from the bulletin side, kind of a standard set of releases this month for Patch Tuesday. We did see the .NET framework updates, like I said. Haven't seen those for a couple of months. So be aware of those, and they are rated critical. So you want to make sure you roll those out. With that,
yeah,
Chris,
and
go ahead.
The only thing I would add around Exchange, 2 vulnerabilities, if I recall correctly, and they, thank you, Todd.
Yep.
So 2 CVEs resolved. Neither are publicly disclosed or known exploited, but we talked about this the last couple of times. There were some updates. There has been a quick turn on taking a vulnerability that's been resolved into an exploit on Exchange. There's a couple of very sophisticated threat actors who specialize in Exchange vulnerabilities, Hafnium, and I forget what the other one's called off the top of my head. It's been a few months. But I would suggest not letting this sit out there for too long, just because of the fact that it's been a little while since they've gotten something new in their bag of tricks. They may be itching to get something else to take advantage of. So that was the only additional note I wanted to throw in there on that. There was a question. Looks like, Todd, you're already answering the question about
it
the
is.
CU
I have
level.
More little typos. These should be CU12 and CU13 for 2019.
Todd was
I'm getting
typo
complacent
issues,
looking at these things. Yeah, I apologize.
Yep. And somebody else commented on you had GitHub as in GET instead of GIT. So I think autocorrect got you there. Yep.
Lovely.
Thanks for keeping Todd on his toes, for everyone.
Yeah, thanks.
We'll get a few of those corrected. So let's see. I think we got most of those questions there. There was one other question for those of you running on EPM. On June 7th, we did release a bulletin as well. We released a fix for a confirmed CVE, CVE 2023-28324. This is in Endpoint Manager 2022 and earlier versions. So for those of you running on Ivanti Endpoint Manager, this CVE, the advisory just came out on the 6th of June, and the update is available. The CVE is an 8.2 CVSS score, not disclosed or exploited in the wild. It was reported by a researcher. So best of our knowledge, not actively being exploited. A question from somebody came up about, how quickly should they be resolving this? I would say in this case, because we don't have any other risk indicators, I would follow your normal SLA on vulnerability remediation. So this being an 8.2 and a high, depending on what your resolution time is, if it's 30 days, 14 days, try to respond within that time frame. Now, that may change a little bit in some cases when you've got, basic software like Adobe Reader, Google Chrome, the Windows OS. Those are a lot easier to roll out and have a lot less chance of, breaking changes. When you're doing middleware or management infrastructure, like, routers, switches, a platform like EPM or other type of management software, you have core consoles, you have agentry, you have a lot of things to worry about there. So again, your processes will probably vary based on organizations, but I would say get this queued up and start to work through the testing process to get to upgrading. But it's not going to be like a get this done before you start any OS patching this month kind of thing. Just make sure that it's getting queued up and you're starting to work through to get the fix in place for this one. So that is the update on that in case anybody else is on EPM and either had seen or had a question about that or didn't see that yet. And if you go to our forums, you will be able to see the advisory for that. Actually, let's see if Jenna, I don't know if you'd be able to share this out with everybody, but this is the URL. Let's see if we can get that shared out to everybody in there so anybody on EPM can go take a look at that advisory if they need to. All right, between the Patch Tuesdays. For those of you who this might be your first Patch Tuesday webinar you're joining us for, just a little bit of background. We talk about what happened between last month and this month because most vendors are on a continuous release cycle. As I mentioned, Google Chrome had a release just last week. Before that, and after May Patch Tuesday and before June Patch Tuesday, they had a total of 3 releases. Firefox ESR, Apple iTunes, Wireshark. Those are all updates that came out between Patch Tuesdays and had CVEs associated with them. Cool. So Jenna just shared that link out in the question box for everybody if you need to get access to that. So make sure to grab that if you need it. The next group down, security updates without CVEs. Because these types of software work on kind of a continuous release stream, there could be cases where you could be on 2 to 3 versions back. So, we got N-1, 2, 3, 4, 10, whatever. The release that just came out may not have CVEs tied to it. But from a defense in depth perspective, we treat them like a security update because the release right before it may have had CVEs tied to it. So that list of updates, you can see there's a lot of them too.
There are a lot this month.
A lot of software. Yeah. Constantly releasing software, all these vendors. So this is just making sure that you're aware that there's, bug fixes or other feature enhancements that might have released for those. But the latest version didn't have a CVE, but 1 release back, 2 releases back, somewhere in there, which might be in your upgrade chain, had CVEs in it. So from a defense in depth perspective, we recommend trying to keep all of this software as up to date as possible. The top group there, though, that's the ones you really want to worry about because that's the ones that had new CVEs with those releases. So just a little bit of background there for those of you who might not have seen that before. For this month, we had Google Chrome, the 3 different releases. There was 6 that released earlier. 13 additional after that. So they went from the 13 build to the 114 build. And then they had the 0-day release on June 6th. That was the additional 1 vulnerability there, CVE 2023-3079. And then now yesterday's release that had 5 more CVEs resolved in it, the one that Todd just talked about earlier. So that's the lineup there from Chrome. If you get up to yesterday's release, you've taken care of all of those. The one you really want to make sure of is that you're on at least that build 114.0.5735.110, 110 or later. That makes sure that you've got the 0-day resolved. Firefox 114 also resolved 4 vulnerabilities there. Firefox ESR resolved 2 vulnerabilities in that release. Apple iTunes fixed 2 vulnerabilities. Wireshark is one of those dangerous tools that does great things for you, but threat actors can absolutely turn it around and use it against you. So wherever it is, either remove it from or make sure you're keeping it up to date within your infrastructure, because between the different branches there, you've got 5 or 7 vulnerabilities resolved in this latest. And I would say we probably see at least every other month, there's a Wireshark update or 2 pretty commonly updated. And I mean, this is the type of security tool that gives you access to look into traffic and be able to get down into a very deep level of observation in there. So yes, absolutely, threat actors would be interested in turning some of those to their advantage. So that's the lineup of additional security updates that you'll want to worry about that happened between Patch Tuesdays this month. Apple, as we've tried to do in the past few months here, we've tried to give you an update on what are all the Apple updates or third-party updates on the Apple platform that have come out. So they're the same 3 Chrome updates: Firefox, ESR, Edge, because it's Chromium based, had 3 updates there. And then Chrome and Edge both get the latest 1.14 build or .114 build. It's kind of confusing having it start and end with 1.14 for that build. Microsoft Office 2019 on Mac, Mac OS Monterey, Ventura, Big Sur, and Safari all had updates in the past few weeks. And then Thunderbird had a release, but that one did not have any CVEs tied to it. And then you've got your non-security. These are specifically like feature updates. So the Mac OS Ventura update, 51 CVEs resolved in the latest OS update there. Monterey had 29 resolved, and Safari resolved 5 vulnerabilities. Big Sur, their latest release, resolved 25 vulnerabilities. The Google Chrome updates, similar to the other, although I think the Windows side had 13 in that second one. This one had 14. And then the Chrome for Mac, that was that 0-day fix that came out. The Edge related releases there. Again, the third one with the fixed 1 vulnerability for both of those browsers, that's the one you want to make sure you're at least at that build. That's the 0-day. And then Firefox with 4 and 2, depending on if you're on the Firefox or ESR branch. Office with 2 vulnerabilities resolved for the Office 2019 on Mac. And that wraps up the Between the Patch Tuesdays. All right. Getting back over to wrap up.
I was going to say one final comment there, Chris, on the Mac stuff is that the Apple Developers Conference was just last week. And if any of you attended or listened in on some of that, the next version of the operating system is going to be Sonoma. It is out and available kind of in beta right now for early developers to take a look at. And so we'll probably see that released later this year. It looks like, Apple's been on the new OS release once a year treadmill for a while. So be prepared to move forward once again later this year.
All right. Final questions coming in here. Jesse was asking a general question of, is anyone else hating the bug with Edge taking over as the default PDF viewer? He's shaking his fist at Microsoft up in Mount Olympus. I'm sure there's others who are frustrated by that one as well. If you haven't already, send Microsoft your nasty gram about that. Let's see. Xavier, we usually update our deployment images once every 3 months. It was updated in May, but given the vulnerabilities on Windows 10 this month, would you recommend us to update our deployment images with this month's updates? I would say that May would be more important, or having it at least be up to May is more important than having it be on June, because June didn't introduce any new 0-day fixes. So if you've got it up to May's Patch Tuesday level, you've taken care of any of the known exploited vulnerabilities before. I guess what I would say there, based on the Netlogon and Kerberos changes, next month is really probably the one you're going to want to get back up to, because that's where they're going to go more enforcement level with everything. So Xavier, if you're trying to figure out where do you go with that way you make sure every system goes out with the right configuration set there. July's probably the one you want to get standardized on again, because that's the one where either full enforcement is going into place or doing the June update will be obsolete here in a month if you've got any of special configuration on those, I think. But that's probably where I would suggest on that one is wait till July if you're going to look to rebaseline that. What does CVE 2023-32019 break if you set the registry key to enable? Let's see, 32019. Which one was that? This is the Windows kernel information disclosure vulnerability. The attacker could exploit this vulnerability in a heap memory from a privileged process running on the server. Okay. Philip, I think you might have had the wrong CVE on that one. This one doesn't look like it has a registry key associated there. Were you talking about the Kerberos or Netlogon vulnerabilities. That one we might have to take an additional question on if you've got something specific there. But I didn't see anything in 32019 about a registry key. So, all right. Todd, do we have any other questions that you saw? Or have we gotten to most everybody?
Got through most of them.
Okay. All right.
Else. Yep.
Thanks, everyone. I know there was a lot of operational changes that we covered this month, so we spent a lot of time, especially on the Kerberos and Netlogon. I would say, when in doubt, use group policy to push the specific registry key that's in the documentation. In variations where you're seeing something different than the documentation, best to check with Microsoft on if your registry key you're seeing is correct or not. Okay, so Philip did respond back with a KB article. Let me see if I can get to that one. How to manage the vulnerability associated with 2023 32019. Okay. Yeah, they didn't make that very obvious in the CVE itself. All right, so we've got resolution to mitigate the vulnerability associated with this. Install the June 2023 update or later. By default, the fix for this vulnerability is disabled. Okay, so by default, disabled, you have to turn on the fix. And they've got a very complicated number, and it's different for every Windows branch. Lovely. This is beautiful work here. Thank you, Microsoft. Oh, and on Windows 10 1809, they, instead of a D word of a number, they go lazy retry on commit failure as the D word name. Not confusing at all. They don't say anywhere when you turn on enforcement, what's going to change. They just said that, hey, there's a fix. To turn on the fix, change it from disabled to enabled. Yeah, I apologize, Philip. They're not giving us anything to go on. That one's going to take a real world test to figure out if it's going to make or break in your environment. For more information about this vulnerability, let's go and see if there's anything more. No, that's the CVE page, which, yeah, they don't give any detail on, like, is there an event ID or something to look for after you do this to see if things are working or not? Nothing. They give you nothing to go on. So in this case, it's an information disclosure, CVSS score of a 4.7. I would suggest that you test this on a group of systems to see if anything is breaking. But beyond that, I would have to defer to Microsoft to see if they can give you any clear detail on what type of behavior change are you expecting if you enable that. The fact that they put it in there as a disabled by default, the low CVSS score, there's no disclosure or note exploited against this. They're probably treating this as if you're really concerned about it, here's how you turn it on. But for most people, I'm guessing they're not even going to realize you had to turn something additional on for this, because they've made it pretty hard to see that you actually had to do something more. Yeah, that's the best I got for you on that one, Philip. Sorry. This is another CVE that Philip was asking about. There's an associated KB article, which was pretty difficult to find unless you were finding the KB directly. In there, they talk about a registry value to set. By default, the update is not going to turn on the mitigation for this. It's there, but disabled by default. You need to, if you want to turn this on, you have to go and manipulate this registry value. And in there, you've got a different value depending on, which branch of the OS you're on. So what I was saying before with like a different D word value with each of those. And then on the really old branches, they call it this lazy retry on commit failure. So you'd have to change those values to turn on enforcement for this. The question was, what will this potentially break? In this case, they don't give you any indication of, if you enable this, what is the behavior change? So I don't know. Real world testing is the only way you're going to find out that, or contacting Microsoft to figure out what the behavior change is, or any type of event IDs or anything that you could get off of it. All right. Thank you, everyone. That is a wrap for this month. As always, you should definitely subscribe and make sure that you're getting the latest information from us. We're going to do not just the monthly updates, but we'll also be streaming other things like the top questions asked and other great tidbits of information that you're going to want all throughout. So definitely subscribe to our feed, and we'll see you here again next month.
We look forward to seeing you soon.